Welcome to another episode of The Synapse. My name is Serene Feng.
My name is Shreya Velagala.
And today we are excited to have a very special guest, Natalie Casey, on the show who will talk with us about machine learning. Natalie Casey is a senior software engineer in the Salesforce Einstein team, which is a set of best-in-class platform services that bring advanced AI capabilities into the core of their customer service platform. Hi, Natalie.
Hey.
Thanks for being here with us today. So we're going to begin with our first question. Could you please tell us a bit about your background and your role at Salesforce?
Definitely. So I've been a software engineer at Salesforce working on the Einstein team for the last 2.5 years. I started my journey into the tech world in college. So I went to Pomona College, which is a liberal arts school near LA. And I'd never done any coding before in my life. I didn't really know what it meant, but I had a free elective and I enjoyed math. So I figured I might as well try it out and ended up really enjoying it. So I was drawn to it because it had a lot of the same logic and problem solving that math did, but I liked having some sort of concrete thing that I'd actually created at the end of working hours and hours. So instead of doing proofs, I could actually build something and be able to use it at the end of it. So that brought me into the computer science space. And then from there, ended up getting an internship at Salesforce and then coming back full time and being placed on one of their AI teams. So I actually didn't have any AI or machine learning experience academically or officially. It's all been on the job since then.
So what do you feel is your connection to machine learning and artificial intelligence now that you're part of the field?
I think it's a really, really wonderful and amazing tool in that it's super powerful, and the problems you can solve with it you can apply it to so many different problems and really industries. I think it's also a new technology in a lot of senses. So we've had data analytics for a long time now, and statistics beyond that. I think you can think about machine learning as kind of the next iteration of that. So it didn't just come out of nowhere. There's been a lot of work in the math space and in the data space for a long time before this. What's different now is the scale of data that we have. So there's just so much data. You can do a lot more with those predictive technologies now. Mm-hmm. So my connection to it is I've kind of gotten to see a lot of the growth and investment in this space and learn with it. So I didn't come into it, as I said, with any particular focus from an academic setting or even a learning on my own setting. I was really placed on a team that was meant to build something. So it's been cool to see the industry grow as my learning has grown as well. And there's definitely different aspects of it that I'm particularly drawn to. I think we can get into those in a little bit, but that's kind of been my experience so far.
Okay, that's really cool. So what type of projects are you working on right now? And what are kind of the goals of your projects?
So I have been working for almost all of my time at Salesforce on a product called Einstein Prediction Builder. And what that is it's an application for Salesforce admins to build AI and machine learning products without needing to code and not needing that data science background. So actually, let me take a step back and explain what Salesforce is, because I did not know what it was before I started working here. I think it took me many months once I started working here to figure out what it is. But you can basically think of Salesforce as a glorified database. So it is a software on the cloud where you can store all your data that's related to your business. And it started in sales, but it's extended to so many different industries now. We've got colleges using it, we've got nonprofits, banks, healthcare systems. All of these different companies are able to put the data that's relevant to what they're trying to do into Salesforce and have it organized and be able to do stuff with it. So where my product comes in is it allows you to take all that data that you have stored in Salesforce and then walks you through how you could go about setting up a machine learning prediction to use that data to make predictions about future data that's coming in. So through that, we've gotten to work on a lot of different parts of that. One part I love a lot is the education aspect, because we're targeted towards people who don't have that background in data science, we are able to teach them different concepts and introduce them to machine learning terms and different things to think about while they're going through and building that model. I also am particularly drawn to transparency and explainability for a number of reasons, but I think that fits in well with the education. So it's a really interesting problem to solve. How are you able to explain to someone what AI is, explain to someone what's in this model if they're not even really sure what a model is, and allow them kind of to better engage with their model and understand what it actually is going to help them do. The reason I'm particularly interested in that is one of the things that got me really excited about AI was learning more and more about fairness and accountability and transparency in artificial intelligence spaces. So a quick summary on that. Basically, a lot of people are treating machine learning models as like a black box. So you'll be like, let's throw this mathematical algorithm at some data and then it'll give us the truth out. But that can be really dangerous because the algorithm that you're coming up with is coming from a set of data, and data historically is not always treated the same groups fairly. And so if you have data that's built on decades and decades of behavior we don't want to replicate going forward, an algorithm is not going to be able to distinguish which patterns are useful and helpful in predicting who's likely to buy a home and which patterns are kind of a symptom of redlining and like years of all these really racialized policies. So that's kind of a long tangent, but that gets back to the importance of how do you communicate what this algorithm is actually using to make its predictions and why it's important to be able to explain that.
Okay, so since we're like talking about how kind of data for AI and machine learning is an accumulation of data from like a long time, how are you guys trying to remove like bias in data?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting we're at a really interesting point with that because I think the industry in general is realizing that it's important and there's not a clear solution. What makes it such a complicated problem is that there isn't a simple technical fix that you can say, just do this to your model and it'll work. A huge investment is in explainable AI and being to add those transparency layers and educate people on the issue. But there's so much more that we can be doing in a lot of spaces too, but in this in particular. So I'd say right now, kind of the most interesting work is actually being done by researchers and people who are able to dedicate all of their time into bringing in people from different industries, having a really interdisciplinary approach and looking at these different models and figuring out when are bias mitigation strategies helpful, when do they end up actually making the problem worse, and how can you identify them? So.
Okay. And what are like obstacles you faced in AI and machine learning at Salesforce?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the obstacles we face, I would say, are not necessarily AI specific, but come from just working on a complicated problem with a lot of different teams and finding ways to make sure that, details aren't lost in translation. That's one thing that I've improved a lot on. I think when I first started, it's scary when you don't know something, but actually now kind of leaning into not knowing and being able to talk to the right people and tracking down exactly what you need to know because, if you don't know it, there's a chance that no one else does either. And so if you can identify those things earlier on, I think that's always helpful. In terms of AI, one challenge is getting people to understand that the way you can use your machine learning models, especially when you're first building them, is slightly different from, I would say, other technologies. At least that's been my experience. So it's not something that's going to be perfect right out the bat. You're going to want to iterate. You're going to want to understand what's happening and how you can tweak it and change it to make it better. So I would say that is kind of getting people over that hump and realizing that it's going to be more of an involved process, but that makes it even more rewarding, is a cool challenge we get to work with.
Yeah. So a lot of our listeners are like middle school, high school, and university students. And what would you tell them about the future of AI?
Oh, there's so much more coming is probably what I would say. I mean, we talked about the fairness and bias stuff that I'm really excited about. And part of what's exciting is that no one knows what to do about it, really, which can be terrifying as well. But there's so much space for ideas and, new problems coming up. I would say just getting your hands, like what it is, hands dirty, your feet wet, whatever the phrase is. But kind of taking that entry point to be like, what is AI? Am I interested in this? And then even within AI, there's so many different paths you can go down, and finding one that you're interested in, because there's only going to continue to be more growth. So if it's something you're interested in, there is plenty of room and we could use more minds thinking about it. That being said, just to go back to my background, like I didn't take the data science classes, I didn't do the machine learning normal track, I would say. So I also want people to know there's so many ways to interact with AI that aren't you needing to go and major in it. You can, my sister is a civil engineer and does transportation, but is now looking at transportation data and some models on it in that sense. You could do more like a different role at a tech company, but working with AI from the design perspectives. Like, how do you actually design those products so that someone can understand what's going on in their model? There's a lot of different paths that you can still take. And if AI is something that's interesting to you, you can bring it into whatever world you want to work in. So that's kind of the takeaway, I would say.
Okay. So what do you see for the future of customer relationship management at Salesforce in terms of AI?
Yeah, so future of AI at Salesforce is kind of uniquely positioned right now where, or not now, just in general, because like I said in the beginning, so many different types of companies use Salesforce. And so they're in this really awesome place where they get to be an entry point into all these different problems that can be solved, and having people come to say, like, everyone from their different worlds, because they're interacting with Salesforce, can get that entry point into the AI space. So it's been really cool to work with nonprofits to do some predictive models over like who are likely to donate this quarter or who's likely to come volunteer, and working with them. So people who traditionally didn't have the resources to build out their own machine learning groups are just now beginning to get to use those technologies. So I would say that's probably the most exciting direction, is really expanding who can use AI. We use the term democratizing AI a lot to describe that.
Okay.
Yeah. And we were wondering also, I know a lot of people when they think of AI, they think of it as like under a certain lens. Like they think, okay, it's gonna replace our jobs, it's gonna steal our salaries, right? So what are some common misconceptions of AI that we normally have that you think people should think otherwise on?
Yeah, I would say AI is so broad. I don't think there's any one statement that can encompass all of AI. So that would be like the first thing. I also think of AI similar to tech in that it's not going to be a monolith. It's really going to, be able to help every industry in a very different way. So it's more of a tool as opposed to any one thing. In terms of misconceptions, I definitely think there are a lot out there. Oh man, where to even begin with this one? But we are so far away from robots taking over. Like, it's so funny because when you actually are working on AI models, you're like, this doesn't know how to do anything. Like, I can't get it to even distinguish a cat and a dog. Like, how is it supposed to do anything? So I think people have this idea that like we are way farther along than we are. There's definitely cool things being done, but they're being done within a certain context. It's not like it is, you know, maybe it is good at a specific board game because it's learned the rules really well and can look at all the data for it. That doesn't mean it's going to be able to go in and, you know, make your life decisions for you. So I would say that is like a big gap. But I also think it's really cool to think about hypotheticals for the future, also not having them all be negative. So you can be like, what is it like if robots take over? But you can also think about like, how could we use this to better the world in so many ways? Like there's so much work that can be done in so many different spaces to make the world a better place for people. And if you are able to leverage AI and tech in general to do that, like that's something we should all be daydreaming about. So I would say like shifting the conversation to that would be cool.
And what is one area that you're personally the most excited for in terms of the future of AI and machine learning? Like how are you most excited to see AI and machine learning transforming the future?
I think kind of like I was saying, like getting AI into spaces where maybe they couldn't use that technology before, like the nonprofit space.
Yeah.
And then also figuring out ways like we have this bias issue with machine learning models because of past data. So if we're able to kind of revolutionize the way that we look at data, the way we think about fairness, and like leverage AI to have a more equal and equitable future going forward, like that would be super exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And is there any last messages that you like to leave with our listeners regarding how to best prepare to enter the field of machine learning or AI? I think you said that like it's really good to get your feet wet into the field and to see like what it really is instead of just like daydream or just like thinking of it or reading of like articles and actually like getting into the field. So like how like what are some first steps that we can take to familiarize ourselves with like AI or machine learning or basically like how can we best enter it into the field?
Yeah, I think a good place to start, I don't know off the top of my head what anything is called, but there are these notebooks, like Jupyter Python notebooks, and I'm sure there are many free or relatively cheap online classes that let you explore that. But I would say beyond getting your hands wet, I think finding a reason for you to be drawn to it is really key. So like going in with a problem that you want to solve makes it more engaging. Also, like I said before, I've had a very different path into AI than other people. And I think there is something to be said for keeping an interest in AI and also exploring what you're into and then finding the intersection of those, not feeling like you need to choose between one and the other. That would be my advice.
Yeah, totally. And also, so you said that it's good to have like one problem that you want to solve with the tools that you're gonna learn. So was there something that like really drew you into the machine learning or AI field because was there like a problem that you wanted to see solved?
Ironically, no. So I'm saying all this stuff, but like literally what happened to me is I was interested in software, didn't know anything about AI or machine learning, and was put in this position where I was like on this team and was like, okay, I gotta step up and learn this stuff. And I think that's going to be true for more and more people, right? Like
Mm.
we're going to see it in so many more spaces. And so people who, you know, weren't classically trained in it are going to be interacting with, whether that's consuming models, whether that's building their own. So I think I can speak more to that and saying like, don't feel like you're not supposed to be there, like you don't know what you're doing because AI is scary and there's like all these intimidating papers about it. It's just another skill that you can pick up and it's great if you want to play around with it before. If you haven't and you're just confronted with something, you know, it's not different than any other thing you're going to learn.
Yeah, for sure. Because I feel like it's often a bit glorified in like hackathons or like entrepreneurs like pitching their like AI ideas and how you can best use AI. And a lot of people think, okay, I have to first have a problem that I want to solve before I like learn the skills of using AI or using machine learning. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalie, for coming on our show and giving us a comprehensive overview of your role at Salesforce and how you're working with machine learning and artificial intelligence in your projects. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Our guest today was Natalie Casey. She is a senior software engineer on Salesforce Einstein team. And more details are in the show notes.